we have Ambassador Mark Lippert, former U.S. Ambassador to South Korea, who is a major KBO fan, an ambassador to the KBO as well. And we're privileged to have him here today to take and talk to us about baseball in South Korea, and also to take and moderate our panel. With that, Ambassador Lippert.
All right, thanks, Troy. Thanks to everybody out there who's watching. We really appreciate it, all the attendance here today, albeit virtually. And I'm just going to start by saying, sport has a very special place in the development of modern Korea. Everybody knows about the 1988 Olympics and its relationship with democracy there. You also have the 2002 World Cup, the 2018 Winter Olympics, obviously, which played into North-South relations and eventual U.S.-North Korea symmetry. And this moment where Korea is very much on the global stage. And it's quite an interesting development. It has all sorts of economic and cultural implications, policy implications, but most importantly, it's just really, really fun for those of us who are big KBO fans, people who have played, or people who operate in and around the league. And with us, we have an all-star stacked panel today. We have, let me just start with Esther Lee, super agent of KBO. She has multiple KBO and MLB stars on her roster. She's got Jung-Ho Kang, who you may have seen with the Pirates, Hyun-Soo Kim, who played with the Orioles, now with the LG Twins, Park Byung-ho, who's with the Heroes and played here in Minnesota for a little while, and I think she just signed the big prospect Chang-Ho Lee. So look out for Esther. She's here with us. We have a former player, Eric Hacker, the pride of Duncanville, Texas, played with the Pirates, the Twins, the Giants, and 5 seasons with KBO, compiling a 56-34 record, a very respectable ERA of 3.52, especially in the juiced ball era, and played with the Dinos and the Heroes, both in. You may have seen him on ESPN, our another panelist, Daniel Kurtz. He runs the MyKBO website. He has a great Twitter feed. He is an analyst. He doesn't like to be called an expert, but he is an expert. He's a super fan. He also has a great T-shirt website that helps fund his free site. So check that out as well. I just bought a couple myself. And last but not least, we have Troy, who introduced himself. He is our resident policy expert. He is the editor of KEI, the host of this, their flagship publication, Korea's Economy. He has a master's degree from London School of Economics. Is a columnist for several publications, including the Korea Times, and most importantly, wrote a really interesting piece about KBO just a little while back in the Diplomat. So we have a great panel, and later, who will be joining us as soon as he finishes up some taping, Daniel Kim, who you may have seen all around on ESPN. He's a former New York Mets scout. I think he has a World Series ring. He's a KBO analyst. You might catch him on NBC or his YouTube channel. So with that, let's get into it. And again, welcome to all of our panelists. We're going to have a fast, fun-moving discussion here that covers both policy, big picture issues, business side, but also just some fun fan stuff as well. So I'm going to go first to Daniel Kurtz. And Daniel, set the scene here for us about KBO. What's the league, a little bit of the history of the league, the teams, what's it like in terms of the cheering culture? Just give us kind of the laydown for those of us out there who aren't following KBO and or are new to KBO.
Sure. Well, it's an honor to be here. And just real briefly, the league started in 1982. So it does not have the long-standing history such as Major League Baseball does. And currently it started out with 6 teams, went to 8 teams, and now there are currently 10 teams throughout the country in the league. And so they have, quick rundown is NC, Doosan, LG, Kiwoom, Lotte, Kia, KT, Samsung, Hanwha, SK. And notice I did not use any of their team names. I went by the companies that actually own them, minus the Kiwoom Heroes, who are actually independently owned, but sell their team sponsorship. And that's how, you can refer to them as the Doosan Bears, just Doosan, or you can go by the Bears, which makes it a little bit different than some of the major league teams, which are all repped by the city where they're from, which we'll probably touch on it later. It's not just, people from the company that like that team. It's actually still very regional to these teams of which to where people align their fanship with. So currently there are 144 games being played in the season. This 2020 season started off obviously a little late due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so the challenge for the league is this season is going to be getting all 144 games in before basically Christmas time. I think right now it's scheduled to go all the way through to the end of November. And it's going to be after the league actually made a decision because of the cold weather in Korea is the postseason, if it goes past November 15th, all the playoff games or whatever games are left are going to be at the Koljak Sky Dome. So that will help out for the teams, so they don't have to play outside. But for me as a fan, I was like, wow, that is a huge advantage to a team like somebody like the Kiwon Heroes, who are one of the contenders for this season, or I put them in my top picks here. And to have home field advantage during the playoffs would be incredible for a team such as themselves. So that is just a quick rundown of the season. They're trying to get 144 games in, 10 teams, and knock on wood, they'll be able to get that. They'll be able to complete the season in an efficient manner, and there's no shutdown or anything because of the pandemic.
All right, thanks, Daniel. Great laydown. We really appreciate that. And just note, there are 9 stadiums, and one of which is a dome, and that's what you're talking about. Is when it gets cold there in the playoffs in Korea, they'll move to the one domed stadium that's in Seoul, where essentially there are 3 Seoul teams, and if you count the exurbs and suburbs, there are 5 Seoul teams in and around Seoul. So there you go. There's a great map by our good friends at KEI. And the dome is located in basically downtown metropolitan Seoul. All right, let me go to Troy. Troy, let's just quickly dovetail a little bit on what Daniel, his excellent laydown. 1982 is when KBO started, but baseball was around Korea a long time prior to that. Talk to us a little bit about quickly on the history of baseball in Korea on the Korean Peninsula and how we got to the league today. And then I'm going to go to Eric right after that.
Yeah, Dan talked about the league is relatively new, but the game has actually been in South Korea, on the Korean Peninsula, maybe more specifically, much longer. There are newspaper reports going back to April of 1896, when a group of Marines played against American expats in Seoul. Later that year, the Marines also played the Seoul Athletic Club. So the game was first sort of maybe planted there, back in the 19th century. But, it slowly kind of developed largely, amongst the Japanese population before World War II. But it really started to take off amongst the Korean population on the peninsula after the Second World War. You had the influence of the U.S. military who was playing the game. They were providing equipment to people. And then South Koreans started to take and engage in international competitions, both in Europe, in Asia. And as Korean teams became better in international competitions, the game really started to become, popular in South Korea. And, so much so, and, you talked about sort of the political side of things, that Park Chung-hee reportedly saw baseball as a way to improve relations with Japan. But when we get to the early 1980s, you have in 79, of course, the assassination of Park Chung-hee. Chun Doo-won comes to power, and he really pushed baseball as part of a policy to try and take and bring the country together and sort of give his regime legitimacy. And so there is this sort of political underpinning to the beginning of the professional league in South Korea as well.
Thanks, Troy. Great update. And just, we're juggling Korea expertise, we're juggling baseball expertise, and we've got kind of a cross-matrixed audience here. So just to provide a couple of comments, 1980s, that's when the democracy movement is in full throat, full voice. And Park Chung-hee is the controversial dictator, military dictator who led Korea from the early 60s to the late 70s, who is a polarizing figure in Korean politics today, due largely to his success in economic development, but also human rights issues that are extant in Korean politics to this day. So Troy's point is there are domestic political overtones and implications to the founding of KBO. All right, well, let's pick up on a theme that you mentioned, Troy, in terms of international relations. And in this day and age, we've got foreign players that are relatively new to KBO and are what I would argue a great export. Many of them are Americans, a great export from the United States. I think they should show up in the trade stats. And I'm going to come to Eric Hacker, who is one of those intrepid, highly skilled foreign players who played in the major leagues for a couple of years with a multitude of teams and then went over to KBO. Eric, talk to us about your experience in the league, what it's like to be a foreign player, interaction with teammates, comparison with MLB, everything that a curious fan is interested in about KBO from a player's point of view.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. And yeah, I mean, you know what, we could touch on a lot of different subjects that really, classify the foreign players and what makes a player successful and all the things that really fall into those categories. But, I think ultimately it's a lifestyle for you and your family, depending on the player you are and the age and where you're coming from. What I can say is I feel like there is a track record for successful foreign players. A lot of them are the guys that, really buy into the culture, really dive into accepting the culture. I know for myself, I struggled early on when I got there, and a lot of it had to do with not really knowing what I was getting myself into. I felt like I was walking into, a situation where it was so unknown, and I was asking a lot of questions and saying, I just didn't really educate myself. And so I think when I really, reevaluated my situation and really dove into the culture, and my wife and I said, we're all in on this deal, things really took off for us, with the success and the lifestyle, and grew our family there and all those things. I think with the comparison of being, MLB players coming to Korea, it's a hard question to ask with the skill level, just because the depth isn't there in the KBO. And, there are obviously a lot of skilled players. I think that's why we see the All-Star teams, the World Baseball Classic, their Olympic teams are obviously very skilled guys that can compete with an MLB team. But, if you just were to pull a KBO team and put them in the MLB and had them compete for a season, the depth would really get to them. And there's a lot of players in the KBO that can play in the MLB or could have played. There's a lot of, I think, things that fall into that category of why they don't get a chance to get there. A lot of guys miss their opportunity. They miss their time because of age, because of, the way the KBO has the system set up that helps the KBO build, it as a business, as a league. It's so driven for the economy in the KBO in Korea. Which is great. And I didn't realize those things early on when I was there. I would ask a lot of questions and say, man, this guy should be in the US playing. This guy should be there. This guy should be there. But after being there for several years, and even today, I realize why the KBO has set it up the way they have, because it drives the economy in the KBO. In Korea, it's a big deal in Korea. It's unfortunate that some of those players don't get to leave and go to the U.S. earlier. I think some guys just didn't get a fair shake, like Byung-ho, for instance. He was a few years late in his career to get it to go over there, and he had injuries. He's obviously a player that could be very successful in the big leagues and just didn't get the timing wasn't there for him. I think that, the ultimate, atmosphere of the KBO in Korea is it's incredible. And, I think for myself, I found that I really enjoyed the lifestyle there as a foreign player. My family enjoyed it as well. And, I see the guys that go there and fail, and I really kind of know why, because it's kind of I don't want to say it's a magic formula for a foreign player to be successful, but you really have to buy into it. And the guys that are there, I don't know if hungry is the right word, because you see those guys leave the U.S. and they're, say, a AAA major league guy. We call them a 4A player, whatever you want to call them. They're kind of hungry in their career, and they go over there if they're trying to find, trying to build, a family and they need to make money and play a game that they love, they they get that opportunity when they go over there and they're actually considered somebody. And here they kind of get, a lot of guys get left behind because the system is so deep here. There's so many players. And when they get a chance to go over there, they're actually considered somebody. And so if you really buy into that and you're hungry about being successful, those are the guys that are successful. But it's really an incredible league that I think the US, MLB players, the fans here are really starting to kind of get an idea of what goes on there. It is a lot deeper than what they see. They're missing probably one of the biggest things about the KBO that is great, and that's the fans. They're not getting to see that atmosphere of, when the fans really pack these stadiums. I mean, the atmospheres are absolutely incredible. I know for myself, playing in some of the, big games over there in the playoffs and some of the, just the atmosphere is just so, you can't explain it. You can go to YouTube and you can look you can look at games on YouTube and stuff like that. But if you're not really there, a lot of you guys have obviously been there. Y'all have seen it. It's an atmosphere that you can't explain. And the fans are really missing that. So they definitely should go to YouTube and start checking out some of those videos to really understand.
All right, let me stop you there. That's great stuff, Eric. You've touched on a number of different threads. I promise we didn't rehearse this in advance, but you really set up Esther well. Let me bring Esther in here. You heard Eric talk about the challenges that a foreign player faces coming into KBO. Esther, you are representing some of the most, the superstars of KBO, MLB players. You've got unbelievably talented prospects that you represent as well. Can you just pick up on any one of these threads that Eric set up, just in terms of KBO, the player development? What's it like for players as they come up, and maybe a little bit those who've gone to MLB from KBO, and then anything you want to say about the exposure that has come from the ESPN television deal that's brought KBO into the living rooms of many Americans. Esther, if you wouldn't mind just taking it any direction you want there. Eric, thanks for that.
Okay, so Eric mentioned about Pyeongho Park, and maybe he missed his best time of the year to play in MLB. We're not sure about it. Maybe it was a cultural differences. Maybe he was not adapting well. Maybe he was he didn't have enough information to adapt well to MLB. We don't know why, but we believe that a lot of players.
Esther, for those of us who don't follow KBO closely, which player are you talking about here?
Oh, Pyeongho Park that Eric talked about. Yes.
And played for the Twins and.
Play for the Twins, and currently he was a KBO home run king for I think 3 consecutive years right before he left to Minnesota Twins, and he was posted to Minnesota Twins after his 7 years of service time. In Korea, you need to go to the posting system in order to go to MLB before 9 years of service time. So at the time he had 7 years of service time, so he had to get posted. And he had 5 years of contract, 4+1, and he went to America, Minnesota Twins, and he came back after 2 years. And I think, transition to Korean players to MLB and MLB players to Korea, I think it's quite similar. It's not about, it can be an age, but it's a lot of things are very cultural. It's from Asian culture to Western, or Western culture to Asian cultures. It's super different. I studied in the States, but I grew up in Korea. So when I went to the States at the time, it was like everything was different. Of course, the language, I couldn't, talk to my classmates. I had no friends to eat out together. I had a lot of hard time because, I don't know what to do during the lunchtime because, everything was so different. So when I talked to the players, my prospect young players who wants to go to America or MLB sometime, I always tell them to you need to learn the language, of course, at first. And also you need to talk to maybe your foreign players in your team to learn more about the culture. Because I know Eric tried really hard while he was in Korea to make, a lot of teammates to be close to him. And he was trying really hard to eat some Korean food together. And nowadays, a lot of foreign players, learn Korean culture even before they come to Korea these days to KBO. So we really appreciate all those efforts of foreign players right now. A couple days ago, Mike Wright was, he, I think it was like 2 days ago, he pulled out after he hit I think the hitter, Park Se-ho, and he kind of like, say, I'm sorry, which never happened in MLB. But, he already learned that kind of culture before he even came to Korea. So I think it's more of like, it's more important to the players to learn how to respect their cultures and also learn about the league at first. So I believe, I hope our players, to learn more about the culture and also about the teams and the plays in MLB so they can transit to MLB better and well when they're younger, I guess.
Excellent. Thanks, Esther. Let me come back to you. So both you and Eric have identified cultural and you'd almost say some intangibles that are generally outside of what one would say are traditional analytics as being very strong variables in a player's success. That's really helpful. I'm going to come back to that theme in a little bit. But what I wanted to draw you out on a little bit more was your discussion of the posting system in from KBO to MLB and the free agent system, because that's a as I understand it, it's a big difference. You are intimately involved in that part of the game. I would just note, in 2018, 2019 off season, you did a blockbuster deal that sent the Doosan Bears catcher to the NC Dinos. Broke my heart, but also made NC very well. Could you just talk a little bit about that, the free agent system, because it's such an important part of the game, and I think fans could benefit from hearing from your expertise on that.
Right, and also we recently changed the free agency deal. So I'll explain it as well. So players drafted out of high school have to play 9 full seasons right now to be eligible for free agency, and has to be 8 years of service time if you're a college graduate. But currently, a couple months ago, KBO finally agreed to shorten those terms 1 year, so 9 years to 8 year, and 8 years to 7 year. So it's shortened, but it's not going to happen for next year. That we have to wait until 2021 season. So whoever is going to be a free agency player for 2020 and 2022 and 2023 will come out all together after 2021 season. So that's like the biggest difference right now. But that's too long. Because we hope, because MLB is 6 years of service time, but in Korea, most of the guys need to go to the military service for almost 2 years and added to that and this and that. And it's like up to 10, 11, 12 years. That's why when they move to a team, it's age of like 32 or 33. So they mostly lose their best time in their playing time. So it's like in a team wise and the player wise, I think it's kind of win-win situation if they can kind of like be free after like 28 or 27, and maybe some of the young players can go to the posting system and go to the States around like 24 and 25, and they can be better at it when they're younger. So still, we're very thankful that they shortened the 1 year, and that's going to happen after 2021 season.
Absolutely. Thanks, Esther. Great stuff. Great analysis as always. Just to throw in a little bit of commentary in that Esther's point too is that you have a longer free agent period, but she also mentioned something that not every baseball fan is tuned into, which is in Korea, every military-aged male essentially serves about 2 years. There's mandatory conscription with a few exceptions for certain things. So really helpful there. Right. And your point about the posting system is basically a shorthand of how KBO players can come to the MLB more or less as free agents. I'm using that as a shorthand. Right. So thanks, Esther. Great stuff there. I'm going to go to Dan. Dan, Esther really set us up well in terms of talking about free agency. The players tend to stay with teams a little longer. That, in a way, I think might help the fan base. Esther makes really good points about the equilibrium in terms of players and moving around. Dan, talk about how the KBO structure plays into fan loyalty, one. Two, if you mentioned it earlier about the companies in terms of the chaebols, that they control a lot of the teams. And now the other factor is so many Koreans now live in Seoul, right? You have these regional teams, but they're represented, but a lot of Koreans who used to live in, say, Gwangju or the southern part of the country now live in Seoul. How does that, talk to us about the fan experience of KBO with all of these variables in play that we've heard from our panel?
Sure. Well, to start off, for me, because I did not become a KBO fan until about 20 years ago, I did not have a dying allegiance to somebody. So for me, just personally, I honestly went to my first Korean baseball game. It was the Doosan Bears. And because of that, I became a Doosan fan just because that was my first game. So to some of my friends that are expats or, that have never been to a baseball game before, that's honestly how some of them have come about. And I'm seeing that now with the American fans because of the ESPN deal. They're trying to pick their own team and they're like, well, what kind of allegiance? How do I get this, put my rooting interest behind a team that I have no connection to? And so some of them, honestly, in the States have been like, I like their colors. I like their mascot. I like this, the foreign player, like, oh, I followed him in this minor league system, so I'm going to follow this team because of that. But then when talking to some of my Korean friends that have grown up in Korea and how they became, it's also, like I said, the teams are named after the companies, but they're also for a region. So for some of my friends that are from Busan, they're like, I became a Lotte Giants fan because that's what I am in Busan. So they're like, I couldn't root for anybody else because this is my region. This is my team. This is where I'm from, which is very similar to such as for myself. I grew up in Pennsylvania. So I'm a Philadelphia Phillies fan, Eastern Pennsylvania. So it's just from where I was from. But then I did talk to a couple other of my friends and they said, well, I live in Seoul. My family members work for the LG Corporation. And we got free tickets. And when I was a little kid, I used to go to their games. So that kind of employment aspect of being company owned came into play there for somebody like that. And then you had talked about all the people now living in the Seoul metropolitan area. And so the ones that I talked to that have grown up and then moved into Seoul and they came from all around the country, they still have their dying passion for their hometown team where, if it's from outside of Seoul, if it's the Kia Tigers from Gwangju, or if it's the Busan Lotte Giants. So they like it because then they have more chances for when those teams come into the 5 metropolitan areas. So anytime those teams come, they're out at the stadium, and of course, sitting on the visiting side. So if you have never been to a KBO game, unlike Major League Baseball games, there's kind of, quote, assigned seating more or less of your cheering squad or cheering team. So if you were for the home team, for example, you might be for the first base side. And if you're rooting for the away team, you're going to pick seats on the third base side because that's where the cheering sections are. So the stadiums are split up. And so if you are a fan for the away team and they're coming all the way into Seoul, you're going to go, even though your hometown right now might be Seoul, you're going to go to the away side and you're going to sit with your team's fans and you're going to cheer, sing, and just have a great time for that team, even though they're the visiting team. So sometimes I've seen in the past when I'm watching a game or even attended a game, sometimes the away team is obviously much louder than the home team, just because of the amount of fans that they have, the dying passion, the loyalty of those, regional teams from outside of Seoul.
All right, thanks, Dan. Great stuff. All right, so let me pick up on the thread of the fan, which Eric mentioned earlier. I'm going to come to Eric next. Eric, you talked about the fans not being in the stadiums, how that might make a difference. On ESPN, some of the analysts today were talking about how maybe the adrenaline of the fans not being in the stands over the long season may kind of wear down a player or basically not provide that energy you need to motivate every day. And that could be a factor. Could you just talk us through the fan element about being a player? And then would you mind getting into quickly kind of the comparison of MLB and KBO in terms of analytics, how pitchers are handled, some of the more technical aspects. So if you wouldn't mind just touching on those two subjects.
Yes. From the fan aspect, I mean, it's hard to relate to what these guys are doing right now. I think the only comparison that I can possibly think of is, maybe when I was in the minor leagues and playing in, A-ball in the Florida State League when there's not any fans. I think that, you kind of touch on a topic here about, about that adrenaline and stuff like that. And I would have to, think that that's something that the players are trying to figure out how to handle that. I think the one thing the fans or, the fans in the US and the MLB fans don't realize that the KBO fans are, they love you no matter what. And it's amazing that, you can just be really bad and they still are cheering for you. You can be, you can have a bad game and they're still there. They're still screaming. Just that feeling makes you feel really good. Where, in an MLB game, if you're down by 10 and you're a pitcher and you're out after 3 and you've given up 10, you're getting booed and, you're the worst person. And so, I guess I could say that, it was always a good feeling, that when I had a bad game that the fans were still there for me. So that aspect, I just can't imagine that feeling of what the players are going through right now. But I could just say that I'm sure it's difficult. Because we always say as players, we play the game, because we love the game, but for the most part, we play for the fans too. And so, when you lose that, aspect of the game, it's a big challenge. And from the analytics side, I think MLB has seen this for years, and it took them a long time to figure out how they were going to use the analytics and all the data that's involved in the game now. And then I think it's a domino effect between MLB, Japan, Korea, and you kind of see it it makes its way around. And so, when it got to Korea, it was young. And I think we're starting to see, that transition a little bit here where the KBO is still trying to kind of figure out how some of this works. And there's going to be a balance over time of, you've got the guys that provide the information.
All right, it looks like we have some technical issues with Eric going on. The hazards of
Catching.
Eric, okay, there we go. We got you back. We got you.
A lot of the there's a disconnect, right? A lot of times, and so I think we're starting to see that balance out a little bit. And so the players, and you'll see some of the foreign players come over and they're able to provide that just for themselves, because a lot of times a foreign player is going to be as good as he can be based on just himself and taking it and learning and studying the game and all that. And it's not that they're not provided that from the KBO coaching staffs or their team or whatever. It's just there's a language barrier, and it's not that they don't speak English. Even when you're in Korea, it's the terminology of the game. And so even though you have help communicating, it doesn't mean that it's getting always communicated in the right context. And so even in a mound visit, you got to imagine you've got, your pitching coach and your pitcher and your catcher. And by the time I say something in baseball language and my translator goes, well, I don't even know what that means in baseball, in the baseball terms. And now he has to figure out how to put it into Korean terms. Right. And by that time, your 30-second timer's up. The umpire's yelling at you, the screaming for everybody to get off the field. And you're just like, all right, here we go. And so I think as a player, if you don't learn to get through some of those obstacles and understand that that's just the way it's going to be, and if you don't find a way to work around it, that's where the foreign players, they're gone very quickly because they don't adapt. So I think those analytics are great. And I think the KBO is starting to really kind of figure that out as that domino effect is kind of falling to them.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, Eric. Great stuff. Let me well, just let me make a comment. There have been diplomatic negotiations derailed by translation, between, the international community in North Korea, and there wasn't a timer. There wasn't a mound visit. There wasn't a coach. So interesting perspective there. Really, really do appreciate it. I'm going to come back to Troy. We're going to go in the last 10 minutes to kind of a lightning round of just fun fan stuff. But before we do that, I want to bring it back to Troy and perhaps Esther just for a couple of big picture comments. Troy, we've sat through this panel here today, and the reason we're having this panel is there's a broader subject at hand. It's that the South Koreans have successfully managed to battle COVID-19 to a place where the numbers are in double digits. They were single digits a couple of weeks ago. We look like there was a reopening of schools in Korea to seniors, and then all schools in a couple of all students in a couple of remote outlying areas. You've had conversations among trade ministers of Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, Singapore, Canada about kind of reopening, almost like a transportation bubble, for lack of a better term. Troy, you're with KEI. This is your bread and butter. You're a policy analyst. Talk us through some of the bigger picture implications of KBO underway, both in terms of what this means for Korea on the international stage and what's going on domestically in Korea.
So I think, this is really important for Korea. Korea has been an exemplar going forward of, how to take and handle COVID, how to do it by minimizing the need for lockdowns, how to take and, reopen things like the KBO. And, when we look at this, you mentioned schools reopening. So right now there aren't any fans in the stadium, but the teams are hoping to actually start getting to that point. And so they're monitoring very closely, how is the progress of seniors going into school taking place? Right now, they're trying to minimize, create some social distancing in the schools. So if that works successfully, then, you could potentially apply that to the stadiums, have everyone enter through certain corridors, exit through certain corridors, maintain a certain separation. I think the plan is to try and start with about 20% of fans and then gradually scale up. And so if you're able to achieve certain things like this, not only does it start showing a pathway for other countries, be it either MLB, to take a look at some of the steps that the KBO has taken to sort of allow not just the games to start, but to actually start integrating fans back in. But it also shows, because one of the challenges I think this whole crisis has been, South Korea was sort of the second country after China that was hit. And if you look at a lot of the travel restrictions that have been put in place, South Korea has many or more than perhaps any country in the world. But, Korea has done this really good job of managing the situation. And so this will help create, I think, more confidence in not just how other people can restart things, but how people can start returning to South Korea. And then that obviously has economic implications because it makes it easier for companies to engage in business, for firms who have production in South Korea to send the engineers or the other experts they need to Seoul or other parts of South Korea and have the confidence that not only can they go, but that they're going to be, safe and remain healthy. And so I think, both in terms of soft power, now with the KBO on ESPN and people seeing the games, in terms of the demonstration effect, in terms of what you can do, in terms of bringing things back online. And I think every country is learning right now that it's easier to shut an economy down than to restart one. And so all of these things, I think, sort of, benefit South Korea in being able to take and sort of show at least one potential pathway forward for other countries.
Okay, thanks, Troy. Excellent. We're going to go to kind of a speed round, and then we're going to incorporate some questions from the audience. But before I do that, Esther, just, not to get too serious, but just in terms of your players that you represent, these conversations are ongoing about fans in the stadium, safety issues, any just insights from your perspective. You're there in Seoul, both as just, a Korean life in Seoul, but also the implications of KBO on everyday life and the business you're in terms of how the players are reacting and what your thoughts are on all of this.
As an industry person, and also when I talk to the players, we're very thankful that America, ESPN, and MLB people are supporting KBO right now, it is good for some of the prospects who wants to maybe go to MLB someday, can be a great promo to KBO. But more importantly, a lot of the players, all the players, I guess, and also the people working in this industry, we're trying to be safe and also want to be more responsible in everything. For example, we of course want to show a great quality of the game because it's airing to ESPN. And also we feel like, we're the hope to other league and other country. So that's why a lot of people in this industry try really, really, really hard to be safe, not going out, not eating out, try to be away from people, try to meet the minimum people as possible. Like myself as an Asian, I represent more than 50 players, but I almost meet like no play. I have to sometimes meet the players because of this is like a text report season to kind of help them out, but try to keep the social distance all the time. We're wearing masks all the time, 24/7, whenever we have a meeting. So I feel like we're having this like big responsibility that we want to make sure that the league keep going, so we can give hope to not just to sports players or not to just the sports league, but to the people in this world fighting for this virus right now. So
Excellent.
I feel very responsible too, as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Esther. Okay, that's great insight as always. Let's move. We're going to move to kind of what I call the lightning round. We're going to move to a bunch of really kind of just fun questions about the season. But before we do that quickly, I'm going to go to Eric because Kathy Stevens, former ambassador to the Republic of Korea, well-known, famous throughout Korea, and happens to be the head of the Washington office of the KEI, among her other accomplishments. She has a question. She has a couple of questions. I'm going to give one to Eric. It's right up in his wheelhouse. Why are so many of the players, why are so many of the KBO players that come to Korea U.S. pitchers? Eric, you're a U.S. pitcher. Why is that the case?
Why are the KBO guys that come to the U.S. are pitchers?
No, the other way. I'm sorry, I didn't phrase it well. Why are so many American players that show up in Korea to play for KBO U.S. pitchers?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of that has to do with the way that the structure is for the foreign players. Being that the fact that the KBO has allowed every team, 3 foreign players. And maybe that has changed over the years. Used to, I think you had to have two pitchers and a hitter, and maybe Esther, or maybe you can chime in on that if they've changed that policy a little bit.
Not
on
yet.
who can. So is it still it's still 2 pitchers and a hitter, right?
Yeah. So the reason is because you can have 3 foreign players in one team, and only 2 players can play at the same time in one game. So for example, if you have like 2 position player and 1 pitcher, then those players cannot. When you have a 1 starting pitcher, the 3 cannot play all together. So mostly we want to have 2 starting pitcher and 1 position player.
Right. Okay. So to kind of dig a little deeper on that, to answer kind of Kathy's question, is the reason that it's ends up being structured that way is a lot to do with the depth, and there's just not as many pitchers that can take up, to fill all those innings in a 144 game season to make it seem as competitive. And when you bring a caliber of a major league style pitcher to the KBO, and those guys can throw a quality start out there every couple of days,
Okay, I think we just lost Eric.
So that and I'll say this, and maybe people can disagree. I think it's easier for a hitter to be successful in the KBO than it is a pitcher. The league is designed for the hitters to be successful. I think we talked, briefly at the beginning, kind of made the comments about the juiced baseballs and stuff like that. It's doubles or home runs and stuff like that. And as a pitcher, if you don't find a way to pitch in the KBO, and if you're not a little more advanced, you'll get eaten up very quickly and thrown out the window. But it's a lot to do with the depth.
Gotcha. Eric, great answer. Great stuff. All right. So Esther, thanks for your contribution. That was truly a bilateral answer in the best spirits of KEI, bringing Seoul and Washington, U.S. and Korea closer together. So thanks for the question, Kathy. All right. I've got some questions for the fans. I've got some other questions here. I'm just going to kind of kick it around and I'll call on people to answer them. All right. So I'm going to go to Daniel. Daniel, who's going to win the KBO League this year, regular season and K Series, and which player is going to be the MVP?
Way to put me on the spot. So
these are the lightning round answers. We're going to try to get a lot in.
All right, my predictions, which are never right, but I have the Kiwoom Heroes taking down the Doosan Bears in the Korean series. So we'll see if that comes true. MVP this year, I'm going right now. He's on a tear. Preston Tucker. He's going to be the foreign MVP. He's on a tear right now. I haven't seen anything like this since Eric Thames with NC.
Excellent. No, great point. All right, let's go to Troy. Troy, you're a baseball fan. You're a Cubs fan. You're a Lotte Giants fan. You've been in and out of Korea, back in the U.S. What's your favorite thing about KBL?
I think it's actually the seventh inning stretch, and being a Cubs fan, that's sort of a unique thing. You had Harry Carey when I was growing up, singing the seventh inning stretch. But, I've been to a Lotte Giants game, and the atmosphere is amazing. You have the fans going crazy. You've got, the thunder sticks and everything. It's just a really great experience. And I mean, I was literally, this photo is from the first World Series game at Wrigley Field since 1945. The excitement in the seventh inning stretch at a KBO game is similar to the excitement at the World Series at Wrigley. So I'd say probably that.
Okay, excellent, Troy. Question for Esther. Esther, we have one from the audience. Does a KBO team have to be owned by a Korean company? Can you help us with that question?
Actually, I looked at that question too. I'm looking up the rules right now. I'm not sure about it.
Interesting.
We
Okay.
never had any teams owned by a foreign company, so I'm not sure about it. I'll try to get the answer and let you know.
Good. All right, good stuff. A stumper for the panel. Wow. Okay, Eric, question from the audience. This one comes from the Congressional Research Service, believe it or not. I don't think it's in their official capacity, but just a friend who's a friend and colleague of ours who is also a KBO fan and a great Korea analyst, asks if there are philosophical differences between MLB in terms of training, practice, medical, the medical parts of the game, both as a player. And Esther, jump into if you want to take that one. Let's go to Eric and then Esther for any comments.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some differences. I mean, a lot of it, I think a lot of it has to do with financially too. I think the MLB owners and the people that own these MLB teams are so deep in their pockets that they stack their staff's members with, just high-end quality doctors and therapists and trainers and I mean, really just go down the line. They're not cutting any corners, and not that the KBO cuts corners, but from the financial standpoint, it's just not as deep. But they, I think, on most of the KBO teams, you have probably 3 trainers, a strength coach or 2, and all that. And from a training standpoint, I would say that, Korea is a little behind in a sense of, their style of training and stuff. I think, Korea, because a lot of it to do with the military style mentality, a lot of their training over the years has been a lot of that, military style stuff of really a lot of running and stuff like that. And on the weight training side, you didn't see a lot of that. And I know even when I first got there, I'd be kind of doing my thing and working out and training and lifting weights. And, I just got lots and lots of questions, oh, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And, so like we started to brainstorm together. I started to give some ideas and we started kind of working together a little bit on some of these things. So, hopefully that answers your question.
That's a great answer. And I see Daniel Kim, who's just joining us at the very end. Daniel, we're in a lightning round. Eric, great answer, by the way. we're in a lightning round, and we are in the process of just going through some fun things, answering some questions. We've got a few minutes left. So I'm going to put you you're just parachuting in. I'm going to put you on the spot. What is the best KBO franchise of all time? The most successful? Who are the New York Yankee equivalent? Who is your vote for best player of all time, and who's going to win this year in terms of teams? We heard from Daniel Kurtz on MVP and who's his prediction. We want to hear from you both today and historic.
All right, for 2020, my pick is going to be Kium Heroes. Sorry to disappoint you, but I think Kium's gonna get it done this year. Who are the Yankees of KBO? I don't think there's any, but if I were to pick one franchise out of 10, I would have to pick, I guess, Kia Tigers, because they've won the most championships.
Okay, yeah.
But that would be my pick. Best player of all time. Wow, that's really difficult.
Yeah,
but,
and Daniel, I don't want to put you on the spot on that, but that did come from a colleague at the Department of State. So,
okay.
All right, so bookmark that. We're going to come back to you. We've got a few minutes left before we go. I'm going to go to Troy. Troy, you're a guy, again, in and out of Korea, a whole lot of experience. What surprised you the most about KBO in terms of both pleasant and maybe something you'd like to see changed?
So I think the most pleasant thing, is we've all talked about this, is the, nature of the fans, the engagement with the team and everything. I think the one thing I'd like to change, and I mean, Esther's brought this up earlier, and you mentioned the piece I wrote for The Diplomat, is, really some of the, rules in terms of players going back and forth. I, like a lot of people, do fantasy baseball, so you tend to follow a lot of different players. And, I think that there's a real opportunity for, some of the Korean players, like there's a young shortstop who is with the Kiwoom Heroes, Kim Ha-sung, who is seen as one of the top young players in Korea, has, probably a really good chance to come to the major leagues at some point. The way the MLB rules work now, I think ideally Esther mentioned some of this, you'd want it changed to where he could go at 25, because that's when he could actually get a real free agent contract in MLB. So, some of the things that would allow players like that to go. But I also think one of the interesting things is now with COVID-19, there's a chance to take, and because MLB is cutting their draft down to just 5 rounds and signing players for $20,000, last year we saw, I think it was Carter Stewart, who was the Braves draft pick, go to Japan. US players are going more frequently to Korea. So I think there's interesting things with maybe a little changes, right? Maybe a couple more foreign players in the KBO, easier access to MLB, that could really make some interesting things.
Excellent. Thanks, Troy. Great answer. Let me follow up one quick question. You kind of touched on it a little bit throughout your comments. Question from the audience. Do you think the KBO fan style could be imported into the U.S.? Can you see this at Wrigley anytime soon?
I think to an extent, because I mean, Wrigley during the World Series, and even when I've been there before, there's a lot of excitement. I do think, I see Daniel there saying no.
It's like shaking his ass.
Yeah. But I mean, there are cultural differences. It's like, even when you talk about amongst the players and everything, the idea of, the unwritten rules of baseball and stuff in the U.S. and the more reserved nature, I think it could happen, but I mean, it's going to take time.
Okay, let's bring Dan and Esther both into that. Both look like we're turning into an episode of Crossfire here in our waning seconds. Let's go to Esther. Esther, you're shaking it. You're a no on that? Yes or no? You're a no?
Yes and no, because, I like both cultures. I've been to MLB stadiums a lot of times and KBO as well. And I like it in a both way. I like it, somewhat quiet and sit down and just kind of relax and relaxing more in MLB stadiums. And also sometimes in KBO, I, chant the song and I kind of dance all together. It's more like a party style. So I like it in both way, but I'm not sure it can work because we have a long history. KBO has a long history And also MLB itself has a very super long history of baseball culture. So I'm not like really sure about it, but maybe we can kind of like, switch some of the culture, but not 100%.
Okay, great answer, Esther.
And I got the answer for that. If I'm right, I think Korean teams does not have to be owned by Korean companies.
Interesting. Okay, thanks, Esther. Good. Thanks for the note there. I was just going to say, on your previous answer, you've got the makings of a diplomat. You straddled the question well, and I will attest that I've seen you in both KBO and MLB stadiums, and you are equally comfortable in both. Daniel, quickly, yes or no, cheer culture, does it work in, looks like you're going through the airport there. Anyway, cheer culture in MLB, and you got off the hook of any other comments on best player of all time, all that good stuff?
The culture, I like the way it is. I kind of agree with what Esther has just said. I think it's two different cultures, so I don't think we would have to copy one another. The only thing that could be brought from KBO to MLB would be bat flips, and that's about it. I like the way how each league is different. So best player, you got to give me, I would say, Dong-yeol-sun. He pitched for Haedae Tigers. So he would be my pick.
Okay. All right. Great. We got that out of you. All right. I'm going to go. I've got us basically at time, but I'm going to give Dan Kurtz the last word and just ask him favorite fan attraction park. Do you like the drinking contest? Do you like what's kind of your favorite? You have all, let me just say, you on your Twitter feed, you have kind of quirky, Dan Kurtz, you have kind of quirky things about the league. You have fun, you have serious statistical things about the league. What's your favorite thing about the league as a fan, favorite stadium? And we're going to leave that as the last word. I'll wrap up after Dan Kurtz.
Sure. Some of my favorite things of the league, just for on the field, is I love that the players show their flair, their own personality on that, and such as what Daniel just said, the bat flips. As a fan going to the games, I love the fact that everybody is singing, and no matter the score, they're chanting. So like in the United States or major leagues, if you're down 8-0, you're out after the 6th, 7th inning. In the KBO games, you're standing there until the 9th inning, until the final out, singing full throat, chanting, clapping. And then not only that, then to see the players then from both teams then after the end of the game come over and bow, thank their fans for attending the game and for coming out and cheering for them no matter the score. I think that is a great aspect of the KBO.
Okay, thanks. That's the last word. Thanks to all the panelists. Thanks to KEI. Great session, serious issues, fun, fan stuff, great insight from Eric in terms of the player dimensions, and Esther, super agent. Thanks for joining us as well. We're really excited. I'll end on this note and just say that we didn't get to answer every question. We apologize. One question we didn't get to answer, but I'll close after this says, and I'm not going to answer. Dear Ambassador Lippert, do you plan to purchase the Doosan Bears in the future? So I love that question, but I love the Parks. They're great owners. So full stop there. And thanks again, everybody. Great session. We really enjoyed it. Thanks.